LFA Bantamweight champs is going to be the Parkside Rangers versus the Newman Jets, premier college wrestlers and so many things in common. Coming up this weekend, we have Chapo Miles Johns at a Marathon MMA taking on the Cub Swanson protege at a Jackson Wink. It's the determined Dan Argueta. And for Argueta, he had a weird fight his last time out. I mean, referee Keith Peterson was all over it. It was a little bit like J. Cole's hit from yesteryear, Wet Dreams, because there was a premature stoppage in that fight, Matt. Dan Argueta, when he was taking on
in a certain kind of neighborhood.
Ronnie Lawrence, you had the guillotine, the darce, the anaconda, and every which way. Keith Peterson in on the action. The hand was there. It was ready to tap. It looked like it was one phantom tap, and then Peterson touched it, and that was a tap.
They call him no nonsense, Craig, but between you and me, he'll allow a little bit.
But when you do look at this fight, Matt, Dan Argueta, last time out, decent-sized underdog against Ronnie Lawrence. Yeah. In the scrambles, Dan Argueta looked very, very good. And when I talk about the wrestling out of both of these guys, for Argueta, two-time state qualifier in Illinois with those Parkside Rangers. For Miles Johns, a very, very good Kansas State champ in wrestling at, Newton High School? And then he went to Newman College. And Miles Johns, I mean, he got injured. The wrestling career, he called it quits very early on to pursue a career in MMA. He gets that win over Adrian Yanez, over with the LFA, wins the belt, and kind of off to the races. Beats Santiago on Contender Series, and now we've seen this much, accredited Miles Johns continue to win these fights. Now, the two losses are two against very now hyped up fighters in their own right. One against Mario Bautista, fairly quick loss in that one. The other loss to John Castaneda, but Castaneda, I mean, finishing
sexy Maxi
Muin Gafurov recently, that was a good one, and Castaneda just had a big fight booked in his own right. So when you do look at this fight, Matt, for Johns, his last time out, almost a year ago, he takes on Vince Morales, and it was It was bad. It was like Austin Hubbard, Roosevelt Roberts in The Ultimate Fighter. Like, hey, we used to be on the same team. Let's spar a little bit. That's what it looked like. It wasn't a very good fight. It wasn't the best version of Miles Johns. Whereas for Dan Argueta, I mean, that's another one. Bring it to my deathbed. 1, Jake Collier beat Andrei Arlovsky. 2, Dan Argueta against Ricky Tertius in The Ultimate Fighter is one of the best fights that nobody's ever seen. That fight...
Craig, your son's on the phone, but he needs to know about Dan Argueta. You're not a vampire. Like, why every time are you doing this like you're in a sarcophagus?
I don't know. I guess that's just my death pose. But for Argueta, an awesome fight against Tertius. I thought Argueta won it. But regardless, Argueta, though the UFC debut on short notice up a weight class against Damon Jackson, he loses that fight. But he's had 2 big showings since then. Argueta gets the win, another short notice fight, because Argueta was actually supposed to fight Miles Johns' teammate at a time, Isaac Delgarian. Was he going to be the full send fighter? Not anymore. Full send didn't do it. They went with Mike Malott instead somehow, even though that wasn't the premise of that episode of Looking for a Fight.
Shut up, Mike Malott.
But Argueta gets that win at 145 against Nick Aguirre, just north of 10 minutes of control time in that one. We know how good Argueta is with his wrestling. He can just go and go and go like an Energizer bunny. This is really going to come down to defensive wrestling, of which Miles Johns is very good at, and I have it by the numbers in this one, because his takedown defense, 92%. He stopped 13 of 14 takedown attempts in the UFC. Miles Johns' takedown accuracy in the UFC, 5 of 26, 19%.
This is where I have a really hard time with this matchup, though, because Dan Argueta might not have the best percentage like you bring out for his wrestling takedowns, but he is a guy who...
No, that's Miles Johns.
Sorry, yes, offensively. But that's another point I was going to get to. Both guys can wrestle, but I would say Argueta's wrestling is much more at the forefront of his game. If he's going to go out there and win, especially against ranked levels of opposition, he's going to have to use his wrestling and his grappling a lot more than I would say a Miles Johns have to. Even though Johns does have that weapon in his back pocket, I think Johns can be able to make Argueta uncomfortable, though, on the back foot, and that's what this fight really comes down to. Can he draw out poor takedown attempts from Argueta? Because if Dan's able to move forward and really use his volume to then set up his own takedown attempts, I think he does have a great opportunity to win this fight. But if he is the guy moving backwards, who's shooting from that half step too far away, he might need a big shot for his troubles while he is going for some of those grappling exchanges. But the thing about Argueta is, if he is able to get it down to the mat, I think that top pressure is going to be a really hard time for Miles Johns to be able to overcome. I think Johns can be able to to defend a lot of those takedowns, but who's a good fighter who had this in his game? Alexander Gustafsson, here's a good example of it. Great takedown defense, but if you were able to breach that dam, it kind of fell apart, right? He didn't have the greatest grappling off his back. I think John's going to be able to have good defensive wrestling on the feet, but if Argueta's able to get on top, I don't know if John's going to be really going to be able to, A, threaten with submissions off his back, not a huge part of his game, and also just get back up against the cage, do things that are going to be able to get him back up to his feet, because Argueta will break his base down continually, and that's something that's going to help him with his game as this fight continues.
Well, we'll see how this one plays out, because for John's takedown defense at the forefront, you saw it in the fight against Kevin Natividad, push away all the takedown attempts, toss that uppercut, and that was all that she wrote. And John's is one of those guys, you look at both these guys, and I talk so much about the wrestling, very much wrestle boxers, not big in terms of the kicks, but for John's, a nice jab, it's zippy, it tends to hit the target, and a really big overhand right, and the uppercut as well. For Dan Argueta, he'll throw a little bit more variety to his shots, but this is going to be one of those interesting fights, because for John's, again, Marathon MMA, Trey Ogden, second week, where we give him a little bit of a shine, and Garrett Armfield as well, a pretty darn good fighter that's going to be able to replicate Dan Argueta.
Zellhuber, he can grapple.
In the wrestling room. So when it does come down to this matchup, Matt, Argueta is the slight favorite here. We have a look at the Topology votes. I'm sure Cole Smith's going to be watching this one in Canada.
I gotta be honest, I thought the odds could be a little bit closer. I think this is a really close fight on paper.
So do I. I really do. I'm going to say over under 67.5% Argueta.
I'll say over, but I think it'll be close.
A little bit slightly over. 670 total votes, 71% Argueta, 46% by decision, 43% by submission. For the 29% that have John, 70% by decision, 18% by knockout. And again, for Argueta, like I look at the two losses that he has recently. One to Tertios in the Ultimate Fighter that doesn't count. In that one, first round Argueta wins. Second round, I thought Argueta won. The judges gave it to Tertios. Sudden death, third round. And then Tertios was able to get the win with a lot of his striking. And so for Argueta, he has that loss to Damon Jackson where he gets his seatbelt or backpacked for a lot of it. And he's just punching whack-a-mole behind him. And he had some good success with that. But Argueta wasn't able to get the win there. Other than that, I mean, we haven't really seen him tested a lot, and you will against Miles Johns in this fight. As bad, or maybe not as good, I guess, as he looked against Vince Morales, if I can vocalize that correctly. You look at the other wins that Johns has, Kevin Natividad has a knockout, that tough old Anderson Dos Santos. That guy, he fought some names. That's a nice way to put it, right?
He fought a lot of people,
He fought some names. So, for me, Matt, when it does come down to this one, I do have Daniel the Determined, but Miles Johns up the gut. I mean, when he's throwing those uppercuts and those big straight shots up the middle, that really could stifle Argueta, especially with the good takedown defense that Johns has.
So I have Argueta, but I think it's going to be a controversial decision in terms of, I think John's going to do more damage, but Argueta is going to get those high levels of takedowns and control time along with some of those takedowns. And I think that's going to be able to outweigh the damage that Johns might potentially do on the feet. But if Miles Johns can make Argueta pay for a lot of those takedown attempts, especially early on in the matchup, it's going to make them a lot less frequent as this fight continues. And if that is the case, Johns has more power on the feet. It is not even close between these two fighters, and he could land that one big shot. He has a very powerful right hand, like I mentioned earlier, so I have Argueta, but there's a great game plan for Johns to win this fight.
A big-time matchup in this loaded bantamweight division. Make sure you check out that fight. The rest of the video is on the card. Ramos taking on Charles Jourdain next in this fight. Both of us going with Dan, the Determined Argueta. One of these LFA former bantamweight champs is going to get the win.
They will.
Knock wood. So enjoy this while it lasts. Some big-time fights on this card. We've already touched on them, but that main event, I can't get over it. Fiziev taking on Gamrot. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.